should look a lot different facially than the last time you saw me.
Yeah, you got rid of the beard. I think I missed that webinar you did for the show you did.
Yeah, it was recorded.
Awesome. I'll have to catch up. Okay, cool. I've got the recording fired up. Good to talk with you again, Bryson. And I wanted to just, I guess, open up with quick introductions. This is David Lee with CSNP, and we've got a special guest today, Bryson Bort, on the show. And Bryson, you're dressed in a red unicorn outfit. I'll let you introduce yourself and also, I guess, give the backstory behind the outfit.
Yeah, so first up, common misconception is that people think it's a onesie. It is in fact a hoodie. I have a number of custom hoodies done up in the unicorn. I have a special tailor that makes these. Black, white, and then of course red, blue, and purple to represent the different kinds of teaming processes for assessments. As you can also tell from my unicorn outfit, I used to be an Army officer. It's actually how I got started in my career. I am currently the founder and CEO of SCYTHE, which is an adversary emulation platform. And I founded a consultancy called Grim, and I am the co-founder of the nonprofit ICS Village.
Fantastic. So you've been busy with your career, it sounds like. And how does a person transition like you did from a military career into your private sector? I don't know if you would call it a startup, but into Grim Consulting and running your own a cyber business. What did that process look like?
Humorous and poorly. I actually took the first job I was offered, and I ended up working in manufacturing supply chain. So I learned a lot about how factories work. I specifically managed power supplies and complex assemblies for military and civilian aircraft. I had no background in any of this stuff, so I learned on the job. But I learned a lot about Lean Six Sigma and process, and that was my first exposure to industrial control systems. Honestly, I just kept taking every job, every opportunity that I had next, really just pushing the bounds of what I could do and what I thought I could do, and eventually started my own company. So started Grim by myself back in 2013. And starting a consultancy, you have to have enough experience across a range of different technologies and processes in an organization to effectively manage all the different kinds of projects you're going to get. And doesn't hurt to know quite a few people too, which is how we grew by referral, both in terms of our customers and our employees.
So I assume that you took experience in security from your military career, or was that just something you just started and learning as you went?
Well, so I'm in my 40s. When I started all this, security wasn't quite a thing. So I had a bachelor's of computer science at West Point, and I first got exposed to information security there as part of one of my official roles. But back then, it was really running around with the gold disk and patching everything. That was as much as we did. Firewalls were still kind of a new concept back then, and I don't know how to explain this. I think for folks to get into security, a lot of folks kind of just want to like jump right into it, like what's the cert that I can get to get into it,
right?
And there's sort of an impatience to do that, and I don't think that's the right way to go about it. I think mastering a lot of the fundamentals, like how do computers actually work, how do networks work, being a sysadmin, working on a help desk, learning all the ins and outs of what happens in a company on a daily basis gives you that foundational understanding to be able to then make the jump into more of a specialized role, which is, of course, security. Security is much more specialized.
Right. So you took a lot of different skills and started putting them together in a consulting capacity. And what has changed the most for you in this space since that time when you started that company? Has there been, what are the big like disruptors that you've gone through, at least in protecting systems?
Well, I mean, personally, I started my own product startup, which came out of a client request in 2016, where we saw that the landscape on the assessment side. So, security is pretty much I joke that it's the confidence that everything's okay. And the best way to understand where those gaps are in people, process, and technology comes back to assessments. So this is where we find some way to understand what our vulnerabilities are. More complicated and realistic ways of doing that with something like red teaming, where I'm going to attempt to emulate an adversary to some degree to understand, based on what we know, what that would mean to us across those factors. And the system has been a monoculture. There was really one major commercial product that was widely used. There were some others, but that was the one that I saw that very much defined the way the entire industry seemed to approach the problem. And by no means am I knocking it as a bad tool. I mean, there's a reason it was, defined an industry. But the challenge with anything is when you only have one thing doing it and you only have one way to look at something, that's never going to work for security. And actually, mild segue to that off of that is, I think that's one of the challenges we have in the security industry is we don't have enough folks representing a diverse and inclusive background to come to bear. Because if we think about what security is, really that imagination to give myself the confidence of what I think things can do, uh, that comes from different ways of thinking and different kinds of people, and that comes from different experiences. We need different thinkers at the table, and different thinkers are not people who necessarily look like us, although that's the thinking we're the most comfortable with. The folks that think differently and have those different experiences that naturally are just going to approach the world and the systems in a different way, I think bring a lot to the table overall. And so it's kind of one part of it where I saw a technical monoculture, but then I also see it reflective across the whole industry where we are too homogenous in our thinking because of the kinds of folks that we gatekeep and make it harder to get in.
I always wonder like what's wrong, what's up with this industry where it feels like the gatekeeping is really bad. It's very like certification heavy. It's very we seem like we're having like 4-year bachelor's and master's programs now coming out that are specialized in this space, but it's almost like we're behind some kind of curve where like it's not really modern. Like this sector doesn't feel modern in some respects, such as the hiring side, such as the lack of diversity, like you called out. And what do you think is the reason for that monoculture historically, since you've been through 2 generations of companies now?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the hiring managers. One, when you talk about certifications, hiring managers want an easy way to know that uh, their assets are covered, right? I mean, hey, you
Sure,
got a cert. Well, you can't blame me. He or she or they had that cert. Like,
sure.
it's not my problem. The other is, who wouldn't want a candidate that shows up immediately 100% qualified and 100% trained to do the job? I mean, of course, that's a perfect world. And the reality is that this space is growing so quickly, you don't have that luxury of a perfect world. We're
Mhm.
not accountants. This is not come in, know how to use Excel spreadsheet and follow gap and like you're done. Like it's obvious. This is the imagination and changing products and changing understanding, and everything is moving so quickly that to me, you want somebody again with that basic foundational knowledge that understands tech. You want to see that they're able to think outside the box and consider different things, even if they don't completely understand, well, this is the best way to do that. Okay, fine. That's part of the learning. And giving them the chance to be able to do that on the job, knowing that they have the passion to to get there just because they're not 100%, checking all the boxes on day one.
So has there been a person that you've hired or that you've worked with that exemplified like bringing a fresh perspective to this space, and they went on to produce something that was or work on something that was just quite novel that had like this ripple effect across the space?
I mean, that's asking like, did I find like an Einstein level who like changed everything? But uh, I can say that I have had the privilege of meeting folks and hiring folks earlier in their career and going on to see them, do amazing, incredible things that I certainly never would have thought that that was possible at that time.
Mhm.
Um, I can remember so the guy who runs our application security practice at Grimm, Adam. I remember when I first worked with him at another job even before. So he's worked with me twice now, and um, like he came on and he was good. We saw his abilities with like understanding web application security to a degree, but watching that transformation from that kid who came in that I first met, I mean, I guess we were all kids back then, over a decade ago, to, I mean, he is just what he and his team too can do now, and so many like him. It's just incredible. And there was a post today on Twitter where Tinkersec was criticizing the mentor mentee relationship, and
Okay.
it wasn't criticizing that there's not value in it, but that the challenge is there's too much the inherent bias that there is somebody who has so much more to give than somebody else, and there is some depth of truth to that, of course, right? If I have 2 decades of career versus somebody who's just starting out, there's things that I can share. But I think the real point there is that no matter where you are in that career, you're always learning. And so, going back to answer your question in a different way, I have learned so much from meeting all of these different folks over my 8 years between my two companies, who all have completely different experiences. And one of the fun parts of being the product startup at SCYTHE has been getting exposure to different kinds of job functions that I had no clue about anywhere else, right? I mean, having a product manager. I'd never had a product manager. I'd never worked on a product before. That's a unique skill set, and there's a particular way to do it, and how to manage understanding what customers want in different organizations, and being able to bucket them into types of customers, and then figuring out, well, what can our R&D team do versus what are those requirements, and constantly balancing and matching that. I mean, that was, and I'll give him a shout out by name. That's Adam Ishinchi, who's now the director of the open source Atomic Red Team project over at Red Canary. And I learned a lot from him coming on board with that. Somebody else who's been tremendous, that has really, I think, is a great example uh, of teaching somebody the hard way. So I'm a founder, right? This is my company. I don't have another founder. It's me. I have my investors who I have to work with, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with me, and that responsibility is on my head at all times. And I think about it constantly, because I think about my product success to being able to take care of all of my employees. And a year and a half ago, I brought on a chief of staff, Liz Wharton. She's on Twitter. She's pretty famous as Lawyer Liz. And Liz constantly is sort of like, because I could be very strong in my opinions, right? I mean, I had to be to get this successful, and she'll be like, well, right, like, I hear you, but we got to think about this, this, and this. And that we've built that relationship of collaboration, trust, and dialogue is fantastic. Where this is somebody else who is as smart and as accomplished and as strong, and who's like, hey, we're working together on this, and I love that she holds me to account on that.
Hmm. Yeah, I've had, numbers, all kinds of students come through my training program. Right now, I have this class that has such an eclectic background. We've got like a comedian, a history professor, a social politics graduate, a barista slash radio tech, um, and a couple of folks who are just fresh out of school, fresh out of high school, I think was one of them. And it's quite the mix. Like it's quite the diverse range, and I'm always wondering, are we are we teaching specific operations to get people into this space, or is there some kind of like X factor that I can give people to where they can? It's almost like the teach someone to how to fish kind of analogy. And of course, the my coding the coding school I work for has figured that out on the developer side, but I always wonder what is that on our side? Like, what is that level? How do you get people to that higher level?
Well, to play off of your aphorism there, I mean, teaching them to fish in offensive security also is helpful.
Hmm.
That was a joke. PHISS.
Oh yeah.
Fish. That kind of fishing. Um, I don't actually. So that's a great question, David. I have hired hundreds of folks over my career. We have tried to, at different organizations, come up with what's the best way of finding and understanding uh, the talent,
Hmm.
and because it's also a two-way street. On one hand, we're trying to find somebody that'll be successful, and two, they want to be successful.
Mhm.
And in my companies that I've worked at, a lot of those were very niche, high end positions. But then we also had other positions where it was like, hey, this is like we're looking for an IT manager. That's a pretty egalitarian opportunity. Um, Quality control testing, support, service support, customer success. Um, I've never been able to crack the code on how to guarantee a candidate's success when you're hiring them. I have found that the onus is on the organization to really make sure that the onboarding process is smooth, to give them to pair them with another employee so that they have a built-in coach in the organization to help them. Because I mean, even if you are the smartest person on the planet, there's still an adjustment to any organization and how they do things and where things are, and just having somebody help you through that increases your chance for success. To be able to go to when you have questions as you're learning. We always made sure to uh, for our senior engineers that this is a cultural thing. Our senior engineers are not, their rank is not to be in charge. Their rank is to make everybody better. Like that's the expectation. If you're here and you're a senior, your job is to be coaching, counseling, helping constantly, right? Those juniors should not be afraid to come and ask you a question. You should be reaching out to them and helping them to get them as far as they can go. And then at the point where, and this isn't something that happens in a week, this isn't something that happens in a month, but somewhere between 6 to 12 months is kind of where we finally get to see if somebody's able to take off and fly or whether they're just sort of stuck. And
Hmm.
the other thing I always tell them, the managers, is, well, everybody wants to come in and contribute value. Go and understand why we have a delta after all of the things that we've done to get to that point that they're still struggling. Is it expectations? Is it training? In which case, let's send them to training, right? That's part of our
Hmm.
responsibility now with them being inside.
Yeah, training newcomers to this space has really evolved fast since all of this job loss, the warping of the economy. The types of students I have now are much different than the types of students that were early stage pandemic and everything. The nature of their career changes has shifted dramatically as well. So uh, it's changed a lot in terms of how I approach this. And I always wonder as well the context of how I'm presenting things. Are we using, like, is the cyber industry using the correct frameworks, or are we in a place where there needs to be really aggressive innovation? And that's what I noticed about your Scythe product, is how it integrates into NIST 800. I saw it integrates, has some MITRE ATT&CK alignment. I wanted to just get your thoughts on, are we looking at things the right way, or is there a different, are there new frameworks on the horizon awaiting to be found or built? What do you think?
Yeah, so I don't know that I would call it framework, as I think the ecosystem needs to on the technical side do its job. And what I mean by that is you're always going to have your older, more experienced engineers who are expected to work with the complexities of products. But after that, products need to be designed to be intuitively useful to folks in their job. And that was one of the core design factors we had with Scythe was you don't have to be a elite hacker to or understand malware or understand red team to be able to use the platform. It's very simple and easy, and you can. I mean, we actually have made multiple jokes with like Liz. Her background is a lawyer. She has a technical exposure, but she's never done you know red teaming or reverse engineering. And within minutes, she was up and firing realistic payloads on a range. And her husband kind of looked over and was like, "What are you doing? Like, how did you do that?" She's like, "Well, that's like the platform makes it that easy." And when I look at a lot of the other tools in the landscape like that, they're not, right? If there's anything we're good at in engineering, it's building something that is as difficult and as obtuse as possible. And then we blame the user. Well, you couldn't figure this out. You need training on our tool. Well,
Hmm.
maybe your tool wasn't well designed.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach. So you're abstracting away a lot of the technicality that would otherwise be a barrier to entry to performing this task. So I wonder, we were talking about this in class today of like how development has really abstracted away lots of stuff. Like for Python, for example, the maturity of its libraries now has abstracted away lots of the nitpicky coding elements of building a tool to say encrypt a bunch of files. And we can now do things just by pulling these basic functions, passing some parameters in, and you're done. And so I wanted to think, well, what in our context of cyber tooling and like, for example, the platform you've innovated, is that basically the future, right? Like, is abstracting technical stuff away going to bring in the more the fresh perspectives that we need?
Yeah, and I mean we're going to see that in I think the one way that everybody sees coming, which is the increased use of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Um, to be frank, most of that's marketing today, but someday that capability will be there where these things can move at the speed of machine.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough understanding to do that, but and there will still be the human in the loop, and there will be a simpler interface to where the machine, the automation does what it's supposed to do and then alerts the human to come and use because we're a long way from replacing human intelligence to jumping in and going, okay, well, this is what makes more sense, right? As much number crunching and as intelligence as that machine can do, there's still some things that the humans can easily put into context really quickly and make those decisions. And then the other part is, I mean, again, when I look at a tool like mine, it's 10 years ago, something like this couldn't have existed. But having had enough maturity of process maturity in industry and see those needs develop over time, again, we don't replace the human either. We just make it easier for humans of different skill levels to be able to operate at those skill levels. It's like, it's more like a cybersecurity exoskeleton than it is just being like, all right, we're building robots.
Yeah, exactly. Because you would still, to operate something like Scythe, you would still have to understand the attack framework, the techniques that it's depicting, such as lateral movement, privilege escalation. You'd still have to contextualize what parts, which techniques is this attack using, and make it useful.
Well, actually, at the very beginner level, you don't even have to understand that because we've
Really?
pre-made everything and auto-baked the logic in, so you can have a completely automated payload that you have no idea how or what it's doing or why. I mean, if
Oh,
you
I
really
see.
wanted to be that clueless, you could. You can in fact do that. So that's actually on our roadmap is trying to, I call it turning offense into middleware, so that folks that don't have to understand all of that stuff, right? What they do want to know is like, hey, I want to be able to look at threats that think this way, and I don't need to know anything more than that's what I'm trying to test. Right? It's turning it into a more like a generic test case that I would have to do as a part of natural software development or any kind of development I do anyway. I don't have to know anything more than that, and I just click some buttons, and it gives me some tests and results, and then I'm like, oh, all right, well, I fixed these things, run it again, there we go, done. Like that's the level we're trying to get to.
Wow. Like just on demand, just pushing a button, and then you've got a full-fledged, like even presumably like even a higher level-ish attack coming at you with advanced techniques. So
Yep.
that's fascinating to me. Like I struggle to design labs that are safe for students to use, but also simulate realistic things.
Mm-hmm.
So I found it's easy for me to bring in data dumps. Like the other day, I was introduced to the Mordor data dump as well as the bots workshop. And I thought those were great because you got to see actual log feeds from real attacks using realistic techniques. But it's hard for me to simulate all of that realistically inside like VirtualBox, like right, like that's so it's cool that somebody out there is building this kind of thing, right?
Yeah, that's actually our use case for somebody like you. So we've had other universities and instructors use us. I'll give a
Oh, I
shout
see.
out to one I can publicly acknowledge. So Rapid Seven uses us in their blue team training because of exactly what you just said there. Like if I want to teach a student something, I need something realistic to put into the range for them to be able to see and interact with that. So with ours, you can actually have something live to do that. And you, as an instructor, don't have to spend all of this time trying to figure out what am I doing and what's going on. Like, boom, I got a payload that does this. Well, actually, I want something that's more like this. Click a few buttons and you got that. And then the other fun part is since it's so easy to use, we found that you can have students build up their own malware, right? Because it's like Legos. So they now get the experience of being a malware author without having to understand any of the complexity, and then understanding the blue team side of like, well, how am I defending against this? How am I, doing the analysis? How do I look at logs? And so you kind of get the both sides of it to learn from, which is a unique way to approach it.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me because to me it's like if I'm training people for something like a SOC defender role and I just need them to see these things coming at them and learn how to adapt and defend, I don't necessarily want to spend a ton of time teaching like how to stage these attacks per se and how to set up the offensive side of the tooling because gosh, that's really time consuming.
Yep.
And I teach a really aggressive, fast-paced boot camp, and it's like, man, every lab, it's almost like I have to teach an attack first and set up that a lot of tedious stuff. So it's really interesting. I hope this kind of thing evolves and the industry just gets better tooling to use for this kind of simulation, I guess is what you call it. Does the system actually attack? Like, does it do meaningful damage to its targets?
It can.
Wow,
Like we can
interesting.
simulate ransomware. So the way to simulate ransomware without causing destruction is the payload will actually create false files, use local encryption, encrypt those, then call back to the C2 server to say I've encrypted it, and
Oh,
then for
okay.
fun, pull down a text file that pops up on the screen that says you've been ransomed. And that's all very realistic hosted network activities to what ransomware would do, and you haven't harmed the computer. If you want, you can in fact, lock core files. The platform has a lot of flexibility, but the key part there is that the how easy it is to establish granular TTPs. I mean, we have a whole wizard that allows you to build this stuff up again. And you talk about attack, you can build it out of attack, and it has little sub wizards that like make sure you configure them correctly. But at the end of the day, it's it's just like understanding your network parameters versus like having to understand, oh well, that's how I actually do Kerber roasting, for example. Like you don't have to. You just make sure it's configured correctly and it does it.
Yeah, to this day, I don't think I can properly explain Kerberos to a beginner. That's a really tough one. Well, it's
Well, we
like,
have Tim Medine, who
yeah,
discovered Kerber roasting, created a module for our platform. So
that's
we have
funny.
Kerber roasting in the platform, so you can demonstrate it to see what it does.
It's funny. Like I had a student today, I was teaching full disk encryption and how to perform large scale encryption. And he had gotten burned because last time he was playing with DBAN in one of our earlier classes. And I guess he encrypted, like, he messed up his entire lab host computer, like his VirtualBox host, and not just his target, his VM. And somehow he had like scrambled the entire thing. And so it's funny, if you make a mistake, it's like, it makes you like super nervous to like to mess with things like large scale encryption again. And so this class, he was like sweating bullets trying to make sure he got it right this time. So yeah, it makes it interesting like where things are going, because I wonder if are do you think there are like entire jobs right now where we staff people for security operations that will be like blanked by AI? And like, because I'm seeing an uptick in things like automated pen testing, right? That the tooling is getting really robust. And do you think those jobs will shift to operating tooling, or instead of directly performing attacks, or what do you think is the macro change there?
So the one of the jokes I make is there's no such thing as a junior red teamer. You're either
Mm,
fully qualified to be on keyboard, because who else, like, how else is someone going to trust you to be doing that kind of offensive assessment on an actual network, right? But the problem is that leaves so many folks out. We need more people. There's just tons of jobs for that, but the problem is that it takes a long time to get there. And then
yeah.
most folks, of course, try to go the expensive certification route, and it's hard to get into. The industry is not set up to be people friendly, to have a wide aperture to bringing them in. The tooling allows that barrier to be lower, so that it's not that you've got people just running tooling, but you now have the ability to have entry level jobs where today there is no such thing.
Hmm. Is there like a counter argument to be made where you have this aggressive tooling, and I wonder if that makes things more dangerous, because then you have higher levels of capability in the hands of people who don't understand what they're holding. For example, case in point, Kali Linux is now like a household noun because of its so dang popular. And you have people, you have this group of people who wants to join the field. They ask their friend, well, what should I study? And they get told, well, go get Kali Linux and start practicing hack the box. Does this Is there a concern where like we're putting too much power into the hands of untrained people, and does that introduce a kind of risk to normal companies?
So now you're getting into the OST debate.
What's that?
So this is you just stepped on a landmine. So in our side of the industry, there's a big, what your question is a fundamental question with two very entrenched sides to the perspective.
Okay.
The folks that are against the increased production of offensive tooling, uh, they make criticisms like, why don't you include detections with it so that companies can have the defenses with them, like we're adding more to the problem. And then of course we're making it easier for skids to grab this stuff and be able to use it for nefarious purposes.
Huh.
On the other side of that is this stuff's going to get out there anyway. These are vulnerabilities that exist anyway, so why not make it easier for companies to be able to understand them?
Hmm.
I think there's kind of a third way where we can have these tools be in a bit of a walled garden that the community can contribute and grow, and it's not as freely available. I mean, clearly that would be the only way, because at the end of the day, we're talking about keeping it away from people that would do the wrong thing with it, and even that's still going to have issues. So there is no perfect solution, other than that is the environment we're in today, where these things are out there and they are being used. I mean, going back again to that monoculture statement, it's really hard to assess yourself with something that is also being actively used by bad folks. This is the Cobalt Strike problem. Um, I don't know what the percentage is, but I think something like 56% of attacks use Cobalt Strike today. Because once you have it and you have the code, then it's easy to make derivatives. And by the way, for those of you who want to understand defense, uh, making minor modifications to offensive code pretty much will bypass almost all defensive controls.
Minor modifications, as in basically altering it so that signature-based defenses don't see it. And how else does that make it tougher to
That
detect?
that's it. The majority of, for all of the money that has gone into defense, The majority of defensive controls are still based on static IOCs. Hashes, so I look for a specific file signature, I look for specific IPs, I look for specific domains. And the reality is that all I have to do is change any one of those, and now I'm something different. And defenses have to find me again. Uh, this is actually again why one of the design philosophies we came up with our platform is stop trying to find the basic IOCs, start looking at how to correlate events, understanding how those represent particular adversarial behaviors. And now you're starting to build a stronger detection pipeline where, yeah, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You're not going to be able to keep the attacker out. They will get access, right? That initial access, the breach will happen. The question now is how quickly can you find anything that's anomalous, because you have the ability to drive your understanding of your own environment.
Yeah, so the idea there is a behavioral analysis versus old school thinking of like signature based scanning,
Yep.
which is like that's a more of a throwback to like the age of firewalls that you called out.
And yet that's what we're doing.
Yeah, so a
I go up
trend
against
towards
I go up against
yeah.
AVs and EDRs all the time, and they are. It's not hard to beat them. They're
Yeah, can
not.
you
They can't. It's not. It's too hard of a problem. It's
right.
not their fault, right? I'm not throwing them under the bus. One, I mean, think about the problem set of what they can and can't do
Right.
of host level insights, and it's not any surprise, because at the end of the day, if they were completely locked down, I mean, they know where things happen, but if they did that, they would annoy a user. You can't annoy the user. The user has to use the computer.
Well, exactly. Like that's the whole idea of like when I was IT manager, I was trying to protect this database, but it was hooked into our ERP. Like there was no I didn't know how you could secure something that dynamically changes with a behavioral detection philosophy because the thing is constantly changing. And so I guess there just needs to be better tooling that's like, hey, this is baseline change for this versus this is anomalous change, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I noticed that myself. Like when I was choosing things to defend against ransomware, I noticed that behavioral defenses were superior because of they were looking for things happening versus they were looking for traditional patterns of objects. And so I noticed I ended up catching a lot more stuff using behavioral products and tooling than I would have just falling back on old school signature based thinking. So
Mm-hmm.
you said you're going up against EDRs. I mean, your product is competing against more traditional products. I take it, right?
I wouldn't say competing. I would say that we're helping to understand how those that defensive stack needs to be properly tuned.
Hmm.
Something like 25% of defensive products get bought, get put on a shelf. The other 25% get installed in a default configuration, and then some percent from that get installed improperly. And it's simply because they had no way to tune it for their environment. That's what we do.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed. Like each company has radically different needs. Like one's trying to hit a SOX compliance target, the other is trying to defend against APTs because they're a big name in a specific space. So I
Mm-hmm.
noticed that we're starting to think about the really diversified needs of the companies. And somebody I was talking to last time was saying that it's almost like companies are wanting to hire boutique firms, like things that cater to their company's needs as opposed to generic off the shelf products. And so I wonder if like are we doing this correctly where we're making tooling and products or is that whole like MSSP that whole MSP approach is that the future? Like is are these platforms the future or just key partnerships the future?
Um, well, so I think that goes to the fact that there are haves and have nots in the industry. There are the companies that have the resources to spend significantly to protect themselves, and then there's everyone else who doesn't.
Yeah.
MSSPs are the answer to those that don't. Here's my
Okay.
ability to outsource to somebody that can do all of that for me, and it costs less because they're of course centralizing all of that for efficiencies. So we've already seen that trend, and that's like that they are the savior to the smaller businesses, because without them, like you can't afford to have effective security on your own without it.
Yeah, I know when I first worked with a reseller, I didn't understand like what value they could add to the process, but they have these like upscaled relationships to these larger outfits, and they can kind of scale that stuff down. So if you're a small business, you're like, you can kind of navigate with their help. But yeah, it sounds like the same idea as an MSSP can scale things that are inaccessible down to the small, like mom and pop shops that are defenseless, basically.
Hmm.
So it seems like that's how do you train people for this stuff? Like, how do you make people prepared? And I guess it just goes back to what's like the near future look like? Should people just be learning cloud and AI, or should they actually be learning security operations in the context of like a SOC?
I mean, going back to what I said at the beginning, I think learn the fundamentals, understand how networking works, understand layer two, layer three, layer four. Well, I guess layer one. Understand layer one through layer four. Understand how a host operating system works, right? How does Windows work? How do you log on Windows? How do you configure and support Windows? How do you do that for Linux? If you happen to be one of the very rare Mac shops, I guess understand that. That's a challenge. They don't make themselves easy to manage that way. But Windows, of course, being the predominant operating system in the business world, that would be the one I would recommend the most, with trying to get to understand the ins and outs of how to keep those things running, how to keep them networked, how to push out GPO and updates. Um, and then, from there, I mean, because you can't understand the cloud without understanding those levels,
Sure,
right? I mean, at the end of the day, the cloud is just a scalable, extensible environment that's a bunch of little equivalents of that.
sure.
And there's its own complexity, and it has its own different challenges. But until you understand those basics, I don't know how you jump to that. I also don't know how you understand artificial intelligence. I mean, again, I think artificial intelligence is uh, is something that's going to be defined by the interface and the product utility. So, and again, it's going to come to us. So I wouldn't worry about reaching out toward it unless that's your particular specialty, in which case you're probably not going to heed any of my advice here anyway, because you're already like an AI engineer.
Yeah, like it's I agree with the fundamentals, and I also feel vindicated because every one of my labs, like Windows 10 is like the on like poor target that ends up suffering like some kind of crazy like privest attack or some kind of simulation. So our unfortunate target dummies they tend to be Windows 10 uh, or 7 if we want to run something that hits an older box. But I agree. I think the fundamentals are absolutely essential, but I wonder if people are like, I feel like people are really obsessed with this whole like hacker idea of like, I want to become a hacker now versus I want to learn those fundamentals. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how to solve that problem other than just, I think, showing people that all of these crazy new things have these roots in these core concepts. And it's really cool that you can attest to that. I don't meet a whole lot of people that see it that way, I would say. I see a lot of people enamored with tools and processes and platforms, but I don't often hear the advice that I myself generally give, which is see it as a tree, but the roots are right here. And those are things that we can learn.
Yeah, well, people want to jump into the fun and sexy stuff, right?
Oh, always. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm concerned that we're selling these things, telling them that telling people that they're becoming these things that don't make sense because like as you know, the majority of jobs are defenders out there, on operations teams, lots of analyst jobs, threat hunters, um, there to protect the needs of the company. But I see so much hype around making people into pen testers from day one who have no technical background. So I'm really concerned with that. I think that just might be a marketing thing, like a psychology thing. And I don't know if that's an actual problem in the space, but
I think that's something we've seen time immemorial. Everybody that's young wants to jump right into ahead, and
yeah.
it's just, I mean, whatever the technology, whatever the industry is, it's the way that it's always going to be, right? We learn fundamentals, and in this case, I think the importance of the fundamentals is that level of understanding is what allows you to utilize that tool set that when you become proficient in it in ways that others can't, because you understand the rest of the stuff, and to adapt the tool set, not just follow what can be done in a lab and do the progression to get through hack in the box.
Well, this puts fuel on the fire for my quintessential journey to identify the first principles of security thinking, I guess is how I put it. And telling people to stop obsessing over their tools and start understanding why they do everything. And I think I'm going to stick with that approach. That seems to be the right way to teach this stuff. But anyways, Bryson, I won't keep you any longer here. Thanks for jumping on to the show today, and I've definitely gotten to understand, I think, the way things are flowing a lot better. Just hearing your perspective, going through two of these companies and building basically the tooling of the future. Any last thoughts as we close out?
No one person, one team, one organization can do all of this. It's only together that we're going to get where we need to go.
Agreed, 100%. And another thing that I thought was relevant is no one person is going to become a master of cyber. It's really impossible. It's too fast of a target, and it's going to be a group effort of lots of diverse skills and experiences that are going to get us across the finish line, I think. All right, thanks so much, Bryson, for hopping on today.
Thanks for having me.